Adorama TV presents Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Hi everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Digital Photography One-on-One. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, this week we have a great question from Cynthia. Cynthia wrote, I just got a brand new DSLR for Christmas. It's my very first camera, and I'd like to know what some of the buttons on the camera do. Well, congratulations, Cynthia, on your new camera. Well, that's a great question. A lot of people want to know what all the buttons are on their camera. We don't have time to go through every single button, but we're going to go through the major buttons. So we're going to start with the shutter release button. That's this button right here. This is a Canon, this is a Nikon, and that's the button that you push to actually take the picture. It's called the shutter release button. Now, on the cameras, there's different ways to control things like how the camera reacts when you hold that down. That's called the drive mode. How the camera reacts when you hold that halfway down, which is to focus using the autofocus, and all kinds of things like that. So I want to go through the major buttons on each of these cameras. The cool thing is, once you learn where all the buttons are, you won't really have to look at them. You can just sort of hold this in your hand, and when you're looking through the lens, you can make adjustments. And the cool thing is, with each brand, whether it's a Nikon or Canon or Olympus or a Sony, those buttons are going to be consistent from camera to camera to camera. And so as you grow and change cameras, you won't have to relearn where all those buttons are. It's really nice. So let's first talk about some of the hidden features that are on these cameras so that you know about that. On a Nikon, there's something that I really like, and that is the ability for it to allow you to see the settings in the dark. And so on this top, there's a panel that has all of your different settings, your shutter speed, your aperture values, and things like that. Well, in the dark, it's really hard to see that, but on the Nikon, all you have to do is on the on-off button right here, you just go one to the right, and there's this little light here, and it actually turns a light on, so you can see that in the dark. It's really, really cool. Now, on most Canons and other cameras, there's not a little switch there, but it's a little light icon that's on a button. And when you push that, it illuminates this, and so you can see in the dark. It's really, really cool. Okay, let's talk about some of the other buttons here. First, let's start with how the camera focuses. And so that's called the autofocus mode. And there are all kinds of ways that your camera can autofocus. It can always focus, or it can only focus and lock. We have an episode on Digital Photography One-on-One all about that. But how you set that is with the autofocus button. So on this Nikon, there's a button that says AF. So if on your camera you see a button that says AF, that's for autofocus. And that's where you set how the camera actually focuses. If it's single focus or continuous focus. That's what that is for right there. Now on a Canon, the autofocus button is usually on the top. And so you push that, and there's all the autofocus modes that you can set your camera to. So that's what the AF button is. Now it's important not to confuse that with a switch that is on your lens, and on Nikon cameras there's also a switch on the side. And that is to turn the focus on and off. And so you can turn this function on and off, and when it's on, you have to tell it how to focus. But to turn off autofocus, there's a couple different ways. So on a Nikon, there's a switch right here on the side. It says AF or M. So AF means autofocus, M means manual focus. So that's what this switch is right here. You can do the same thing on the lens. So MA means manual and automatic. So in other words, you're on autofocus. M means just manual focus. So you've turned your focus off. So that's what that switch is. Now the thing is, if you have the lens on a Nikon set to auto, but you have the body set to manual, well, this is going to override this. So that's a little gotcha. So I recommend always leaving this on autofocus and then changing your autofocus mode to turn it on or off on the lens. Now on a Canon, that same switch is right on the lens. So it's always going to be on the lens, autofocus or manual focus. So that's what that switch is. So don't confuse those two. One says, I want autofocus to be turned on or off. The other says, well, if it's on, here's how I'd like it to behave. So they both work with autofocus, but they're a little bit different. Now, speaking of autofocus, there's another little hidden gem on almost every single camera. It's called the dioptic control, and it's this tiny little dial that's right by the eyepiece. Now that's something that a lot of people don't ever notice, but what that does is if you wear glasses and you can't see the numbers clearly through the eyepiece, if they're a little bit out of focus, well, you can adjust this, and so that way you can take your glasses off and you can adjust this, and it'll adjust to your vision. Now it's only for people with minor vision correction. If you have some very thick eyeglasses and you have to have major shifts, you can actually buy some lenses that go on the back here. So this eyepiece will come off here. You have to sort of squeeze that. And you can actually buy different lenses that you can put on here. And so basically you're taking your glasses, sticking them on your camera, and so that attaches right there. And so if you wear glasses and that's annoying, you can actually change how you see things through the camera, so you can take those glasses off or correct for that. So that dioptic control is right here. So if you look through your lens and it's fuzzy, it's not in focus, that's what you need to change. Now on a Canon and other cameras, it's right there, same place. There's just a little dial, and so you want to make sure you can see the numbers very, very clearly. Now a lot of students that I talk to when I grab their cameras to help them with an exercise, this happens with maybe 50% of my beginning students. I'll look through their lens and the numbers inside are totally out of focus because they've bumped this adjustment. So make sure that your numbers are clearly in focus. All right, let's look at one more thing specific to the eyepiece, and that is another hidden feature, and that is if you're taking a long exposure at night and you want to have your shutter open for, let's say, 30 seconds or maybe a few minutes, well, light can actually come into the back of your camera through the eyepiece and get into the exposure when you have your shutter open for a really long period of time. Well, on a lot of cameras, there's a little thing on the actual camera strap. And some people think this is just a piece of rubber that has a brand on it. This one says Canon. It's actually a device that will fit right over the back of your eyepiece like this, and it blocks the light from going through there. So it's not just a little rubber piece that has a brand on it. It's actually a tool to help block the light from coming into the back of your camera. Other cameras actually have a little switch to block the light that's coming through that. But if you see one of these little pieces of plastic or rubber on your camera strap, that's what it's for. You have to take the eyepiece off and then stick that right over the back. So there you have it. Okay, let's talk about the remaining functions here, and then we're going to show you a demo of something that's really, really cool. There's one button here that's called the drive mode, and that tells you either to take one single shot, so you can hear this, it'll take one shot, or you can change that drive mode, and so it will take multiple shots. That's what that button does. It says only take one shot or take a bunch of shots. So that's the drive mode. It's right on the top there. On some cameras, it doesn't say drive. It actually has a bunch of little squares. And those squares are supposed to be little photos. And so it's saying, do you want to take one photo or do you want to take multiple photos? That's also the button you push if you want to take a family portrait and you're putting your camera on a tripod and letting it sit for 10 seconds and it beeps at you and then you run around and hop in the picture. So that's the button that you push for that. There's one other button that's very, very common, and this is a little button that says ISO, and that's to change how sensitive your camera is to light. So that's what that button is. And then one last button before we get to our groovy demo. There's a button on Canons. It looks like a little square with an eyeball in it. That actually is a button that changes how your camera meters. In other words, it changes how your camera looks at light to figure out how long the shutter should be open or how wide the aperture should be open. Again, we have another episode all about how that works right here on Digital Photography 101 on Adorama TV. But that's how you change that. On a Nikon, it's this little thing that looks like a honeycomb. So that's the metering mode button. So that's what that does. Okay, well, let's talk one more time about something that's really cool. And on the back here, on a Canon camera, there's a little button that has a star on it, and that is for exposure compensation lock, or exposure lock. That's what that is. And on the back here, on a Nikon, there's a button that says AEL, Auto Exposure Lock. So these both work exactly the same, and the cool thing is it can dramatically change how you take a picture. In fact, that little button does so much that we decided to make a little segment all about that button alone. So let's go into our studio and we'll show you how that button works. Okay, let's talk about how auto exposure lock works. Now to help me out today, here's Sam. She's going to be our model. Now what I've done is I've put Sam inside here in our studio, in our office space where it's very dark and we've left all the lights off, but outside the sun is still shining and it's really bright. And so the problem with that is normally when I compose a shot, well, the camera is going to look at this big bright background and exposed for that, and Sam is going to be totally in a silhouette. In fact, we have a video light on right now. We're going to turn that off so you can see that there is quite a big difference between how Sam is illuminated in this big bright background. Well, let me walk over to my camera and show you how I'm going to fix this. So I'm going to walk over here. Now this will work on almost any camera. Most cameras have an auto exposure lock, so we're going to walk through how this works on a Canon first. On a Canon, there's a little star that's at the upper right-hand corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a photo like I normally would. So Sam, look right over at me, just like that. Beautiful. Okay, and now when we look at that, you can see that Sam is absolutely, totally underexposed. I'm going to walk back over here and explain why. So when I did this exposure, I had the camera framed up, and so it was seeing all of this window plus Sam. And so because the window was such a large piece of the frame, the camera was exposing for that, and so Sam was underexposed. Well, with auto exposure lock, what I can do is I can point the camera down, and so I'm going to do that. I'm going to point the camera down and point it more toward this table and Sam's waist, where the light is about the same as it is for her face, and then I'm going to tell the camera to lock on that as far as the exposure goes. That's going to set the aperture and the shutter speed. Then I'll recompose, this time again with the big window in the background, but because the exposure is locked, then Sam is going to be exposed correctly, but the window will be overexposed. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to do this again. So Sam, I'm going to point this down at her waist, and then I'm going to hit my exposure lock button. That's locked. Now Sam, look right at me. Beautiful, just like that. I'll focus this up here. Perfect. Okay, now when we look at that, you could hear that that was a much slower shutter to let in a lot of light, but you can see that Sam is exposed correctly, but the background is overexposed. Well, that's the auto exposure lock button. There's another button on the side of the camera I want to talk to you about really fast, and it's a button that looks like this little flash here, and what that does is it controls the flash on the camera. Now, just a note, there's a mode dial on the top left of your camera, and that tells your camera if you're going to be shooting in some of the automatic modes, which are great for people that are just starting out with a DSLR. Those are the little cartoons, so if you want to shoot maybe a portrait, you put the mode to a little picture of a person's head. If you want to shoot some sports, there's a little running dude. So if you're in the auto modes, well, this button is not going to work because the camera is going to figure out when the flash needs to be turned on or off. So after you go to the other side of the dial, over where all the little letters are, well, then this will start to work for you because now you're controlling more of the camera's features. You're saying, this is when I want the flash to turn on or turn off. So to turn on the flash, you just push that button and it pops up. To turn it off, you just pop down the flash, and that's how that works. Now, on some cameras, specifically the Nikons, this button over here actually does more than just turn the flash on or off. If you push it and hold it, the display on the top changes, and you can roll this dial to tell the flash to be more powerful or less powerful, so you're changing how much light is coming out of that flash. Now, on other cameras, you can do the same thing, it's just in a different location, but that is how you turn that on or off. Now, there are all kinds of buttons on these cameras that we haven't talked about, and the reason for that is either they're really specific to the brand of the camera or the make of the camera, or it just would take us too much time. But we have talked a lot about all kinds of buttons and what they do in past episodes of Digital Photography 101. So the good news is, if you're just starting out with your DSLR, go to the Adorama Learning Center, and we've linked on that all kinds of tutorials to help you get started with some more of the advanced functions of your camera, so you know what drive mode is and how to set your shutter speed and how to use some of these letters in manual mode over here on the camera, so you can really dial in and get a lot of use out of your camera, and you can grow into a more advanced photographer. Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope to see you again next week so we can learn more about our cameras.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center, where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit Adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store, located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.